The sun was setting over the quiet suburban streets when Officer Ray Thompson spotted the black SUV. It had been a day filled with the usual frustrations. Paperwork piling up on his desk, a performance review that didn't go as planned, and the constant reminders of his empty apartment after the divorce. The dark thoughts swirled in his mind as he followed the vehicle, watching it glide smoothly through traffic. Something about the driver's confidence bothered him. Most people showed at least a hint of nervousness when a patrol car appeared in their rearview mirror, but not this one. The SUV maintained perfect speed, made textbook turns, and kept ideal following distance, almost too perfect. After years on the force, Thompson had learned to trust his gut, and right now, his gut was telling him something was off. He flipped on his lights, and the SUV pulled over immediately, choosing an ideal spot under a street lamp. Another perfect move. Thompson radioed in the stop and stepped out of his cruiser, his hand resting habitually on his belt. The evening air was cool against his face, carrying the faint scent of someone's barbecue dinner. As he approached the vehicle, he noticed the driver, a woman in a crisp business suit, was already holding her documents out the window. This wasn't the usual fumbling through glove compartments and sun visors he was used to. His suspicion deepened. "License and registration," he barked, his voice carrying more edge than necessary. The woman turned slowly, her face calm and professional. She hadn't even flinched at his tone. "Officer," she replied evenly, "I believe you'll want to see this first." She held out a leather wallet, but it wasn't a driver's license inside. In the growing darkness, Thompson had to lean in closer to see it clearly. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized the distinctive badge and credentials. Federal Bureau of Investigation. But something didn't sit right. He'd seen fake badges before, good ones too. And this woman, with her perfect driving and calculated composure, seemed almost too prepared. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, his hand tightening on his belt. The woman's eyebrows raised slightly, the first real reaction he'd seen from her. "Officer Thompson," she said, reading his nameplate. "I don't think that's necessary. I'm in the middle out of the vehicle." He emphasized each word, letting his authority fill his voice. A small crowd had begun to gather at the nearby coffee shop, their phones already out and recording. Thompson could feel the situation slipping away from him, but pride and suspicion pushed him forward. The woman sighed, a sound that somehow managed to convey both patience and warning. She opened her door slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. As she stepped out, Thompson noticed her perfect posture, her alert eyes scanning the environment. All the hallmarks of law enforcement training. But still, he couldn't back down now. "Place your hands on the hood," he commanded, reaching for his handcuffs. The small crowd gasped collectively, and somewhere in the back of his mind, Thompson knew he was making a terrible mistake. But it was too late. The wheels were already in motion, and his pride wouldn't let him stop them. Little did he know, this traffic stop would change not just his career, but his entire understanding of what it meant to wear the badge. And somewhere in the growing darkness, someone's camera captured every moment of what would soon become a viral lesson in humility and judgment. The crowd's murmurs grew louder as Special Agent Chen reached for her phone, her hands still resting on the hood of her SUV. Officer Thompson stood behind her, handcuffs ready, his breath quick and shallow in the cool evening air. He was too far down this path to turn back now, even as doubt crept into his mind. "I'm going to call my supervisor," Agent Chen said calmly, her voice carrying across the parking lot. "I suggest you do the same." The statement wasn't a threat. It was a lifeline, a final chance for Thompson to pull back from the edge he was approaching. But his pride had already taken control of his better judgment. "Ma'am, put the phone down," he ordered, his voice cracking slightly. The growing crowd had their phones out, recording every moment. The blue and red lights from his patrol car painted the scene in alternating colors, creating an almost surreal atmosphere. Agent Chen slowly turned her head, meeting Thompson's eyes. "Officer, I'm currently running point on a 6-month human trafficking investigation. We have surveillance teams positioned within a 2-block radius. In about 30 seconds, this situation is going to become very uncomfortable for you." As if on cue, 2 unmarked vehicles pulled into the parking lot, their headlights illuminating the scene. Thompson's radio crackled to life with his dispatcher's voice, but he could barely hear it over the pounding of his heart. This was all wrong. Everything was spinning out of control. The doors of the unmarked cars opened, and 4 individuals in tactical gear emerged, their FBI jackets reflecting in the streetlights. They moved with practiced precision, neither rushing nor threatening, but their presence alone changed the entire dynamic of the scene. "Officer Thompson," a commanding voice called out. A tall man in a suit approached, his FBI credentials already extended. "I'm Assistant Director Walsh. I believe you've met Agent Chen, our lead investigator." He gestured to the woman still leaning against the SUV. "Would you mind explaining why you're attempting to arrest a federal agent in the middle of an active operation?" Thompson's hands began to shake. The handcuffs felt heavy in his grip. The crowd had fallen silent, phones still recording, capturing his moment of realization in high definition. His throat went dry as the full weight of his mistake crashed down upon him. Agent Chen straightened up, adjusting her suit jacket. "Sir," she addressed Walsh, "we need to move quickly. Our targets probably spotted the commotion by now." She turned to Thompson, her expression professional but stern. "Officer, we've been tracking a trafficking ring operating out of that warehouse for months. I was maintaining surveillance when you decided to intervene." The words hit Thompson like physical blows. Each syllable stripped away another layer of his professional dignity. He had let his assumptions and ego potentially compromise a major federal investigation. The faces of trafficking victims, people who might have been rescued tonight, flashed through his mind. Walsh stepped closer, his voice low and controlled. "Officer Thompson, we'll deal with this incident through proper channels. For now, I suggest you return to your precinct and prepare a detailed report. We'll be in touch with your captain first thing in the morning." The crowd began to disperse as the FBI team quickly moved into position. Agent Chen was already on her radio, trying to salvage what was left of their operation. Thompson stood rooted to the spot, watching as months of careful police work potentially unraveled because of his poor judgment. As he finally turned to walk back to his patrol car, the weight of his badge felt heavier than ever before. The short drive back to the precinct would be the longest of his career, filled with the knowledge that tomorrow would bring consequences he wasn't ready to face. His career, his reputation, and most importantly, his understanding of what it meant to be a good police officer. Everything would be different after tonight. And somewhere in the crowd's murmurs grew louder as Special Agent Chen reached for her phone, her hands still resting on the hood of her SUV. Officer Thompson stood behind her, handcuffs ready, his breath quick and shallow in the cool evening air. He was too far down this path to turn back now, even as doubt crept into his mind. "I'm going to call my supervisor," Agent Chen said calmly, her voice carrying across the parking lot. "I suggest you do the same." The statement wasn't a threat. It was a lifeline, a final chance for Thompson to pull back from the edge he was approaching. But his pride had already taken control of his better judgment. "Ma'am, put the phone down," he ordered, his voice cracking slightly. The growing crowd had their phones out, recording every moment. The blue and red lights from his patrol car painted the scene in alternating colors, creating an almost surreal atmosphere. Agent Chen slowly turned her head, meeting Thompson's eyes. "Officer, I'm currently running point on a 6-month human trafficking investigation. We have surveillance teams positioned within a 2-block radius. In about 30 seconds, this situation is going to become very uncomfortable for you." As if on cue, two unmarked vehicles pulled into the parking lot, their headlights illuminating the scene. Thompson's radio crackled to life with his dispatcher's voice, but he could barely hear it over the pounding of his heart. This was all wrong. Everything was spinning out of control. The doors of the unmarked cars opened, and four individuals in tactical gear emerged, their FBI jackets reflecting in the streetlights. They moved with practiced precision, neither rushing nor threatening, but their presence alone changed the entire dynamic of the scene. "Officer Thompson," a commanding voice called out. A tall man in a suit approached, his FBI credentials already extended. "I'm Assistant Director Walsh. I believe you've met Agent Chen, our lead investigator." He gestured to the woman still leaning against the SUV. "Would you mind explaining why you're attempting to arrest a federal agent in the middle of an active operation?" Thompson's hands began to shake. The handcuffs felt heavy in his grip. The crowd had fallen silent, phone still recording, capturing his moment of realization in high definition. His throat went dry as the full weight of his mistake crashed down upon him. Agent Chen straightened up, adjusting her suit jacket. "Sir," she addressed Walsh, "we need to move quickly. Our targets probably spotted the commotion by now." She turned to Thompson, her expression professional but stern. "Officer, we've been tracking a trafficking ring operating out of that warehouse for months. I was maintaining surveillance when you decided to intervene." The words hit Thompson like physical blows. Each syllable stripped away another layer of his professional dignity. He'd had let his assumptions and ego potentially compromise a major federal investigation. The faces of trafficking victims, people who might have been rescued tonight, flashed through his mind. Walsh stepped closer, his voice low and controlled. "Officer Thompson, we'll deal with this incident through proper channels. For now, I suggest you return to your precinct and prepare a detailed report. We'll be in touch with your captain first thing in the morning." The crowd began to disperse as the FBI team quickly moved into position. Agent Chen was already on her radio, trying to salvage what was left of their operation. Thompson stood rooted to the spot, watching as months of careful police work potentially unraveled because of his poor judgment. As he finally turned to walk back to his patrol car, the weight of his badge felt heavier than ever before. The short drive back to the precinct would be the longest of his career, filled with the knowledge that tomorrow would bring consequences he wasn't ready to face. His career, his reputation, and most importantly, his understanding of what it meant to be a good police officer. Everything would be different after tonight. And somewhere the sound of Thompson's locker door closing echoed through the empty locker room. His badge and gun sat heavily in a cardboard box, along with family photos and the small collection of belongings he'd gathered over his years of service. The box felt too light for everything it represented. 30 days paid suspension, pending investigation. The captain's words still rang in his ears. It could have been worse. Should have been worse, really. But Agent Chen had surprisingly spoken in his favor, suggesting that his immediate recognition of his mistake might make him valuable for something bigger. As he picked up the box, his phone buzzed. Another news notification. The story had blown up overnight. Police officer interrupts federal investigation. Most comments online called for his badge. Some were worse. He'd stopped reading them after the first hour. The walk through the precinct felt like a march of shame. Officers who used to greet him with smiles now buried themselves in paperwork as he passed. His longtime partner, Officer Rodriguez, stood up from his desk as Thompson approached. "Hey," Rodriguez said, awkwardly shifting his weight. "Listen, about everything." "Don't," Thompson cut him off. "I know what you're going to say, and you're right. I messed up. Big time." He adjusted his grip on the box. "Just keep an eye on my cases while I'm gone." Rodriguez nodded, then reached out to shake his hand. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. At least someone still saw him as a person, not just a cautionary tale. As he pushed through the precinct doors, the bright morning sun felt like a spotlight. A few reporters lingered near the parking lot, but they didn't recognize him in his civilian clothes. His uniform hung in his locker upstairs, pressed and ready for a day that wouldn't come for at least a month. The drive home was strange. He'd made this trip thousands of times, but never this early in the day, never without his badge. Traffic moved around him as usual, people heading to work, living their normal lives. A police car passed him going the other way. The officer inside didn't wave, probably didn't even recognize him in his regular clothes. His apartment felt different too. The silence was heavier somehow. He set the box down on his kitchen counter and started unpacking. Family photos first, then his personal items. The badge and gun he left in the box. He couldn't bring himself to look at them yet. His phone rang. Unknown number. For a moment, he considered ignoring it, but professional habit made him answer. Officer Thompson, a familiar voice. Agent Chen. We need to talk about your future. He sank into his couch, suddenly exhausted. I still have one of those. That depends, she replied. How serious were you about making things right? Before he could answer, his phone buzzed with another call. His ex-wife. She'd probably seen the news. The hits just kept coming. Can I call you back? He asked Agent Chen. Tomorrow morning. My office. I'll text you the address. She paused. And Thompson, bring a notebook. If you're willing to learn, this could be the most important lesson of your career. The call ended, leaving him alone with his thoughts and a looming conversation with his ex-wife. On his kitchen counter, the empty box seemed to mock him. But Agent Chen's words had sparked something. A tiny glimmer of hope, maybe. Or at least a chance to do something meaningful with his mistake. His phone buzzed again. His ex-wife wouldn't wait forever. With a deep breath, he answered, ready to face one more consequence of his actions. After all, the FBI building looked even more imposing up close. Thompson stood in the lobby, clutching his notebook, feeling out of place in his civilian clothes. The security guard checked his ID twice before letting him through, eyeing him with the same suspicion he'd shown countless others during traffic stops. Agent Chen met him at the elevator. She looked different in her office environment. Still professional, but more relaxed than during their first unfortunate meeting. Follow me, she said, leading him through a maze of corridors. They entered a conference room where the walls were covered with photos and diagrams. At the center was a large board showing the trafficking operation he'd accidentally disrupted. Faces, locations, and connection lines created a web of criminal activity. Look carefully, Agent Chen said, pointing to a timeline. The night you stopped me wasn't just any night. We've been building this case for months. Each photo, each connection, represents countless hours of work. But here's what you might not know. We've had officers like you almost compromise operations before. Thompson winced, but she continued. The difference is, most of them never admitted their mistakes. They doubled down, made excuses, blamed others. You didn't. She pulled out a chair and gestured for him to sit. That's why I convinced your captain to try something different. Instead of ending your career, we're going to use your experience to prevent this from happening again. Thompson blinked in surprise. I don't understand. We're developing a new training program, she explained, spreading out some documents. Joint operations between local police and federal agencies are increasing. But there's a gap. A lack of understanding between departments. Your incident showed us just how dangerous that gap can be. She pushed a folder toward him. Inside were reports of similar incidents across the country. Local law enforcement accidentally interfering with federal operations. Federal agents failing to properly communicate with local police. We need someone who's been on both sides, she continued. Someone who can speak from experience about the consequences of assumptions and poor communication. Someone who learned the hard way. Thompson flipped through the reports, seeing his own story reflected in different cities, different departments. You want me to help train other officers? More than that, Agent Chen replied. We want you to help us build the program from the ground up. Your suspension gives us 30 days to start. If it works, this could become a permanent part of police training nationwide. She stood up and walked to the board. See this operation? We're rebuilding it, starting fresh. And while we do, you'll learn exactly what goes into federal investigations. You'll understand why coordination matters, why protocols exist. Then you'll help us teach others. Thompson looked at his notebook, still empty. Why me? Why not let me fade away as a cautionary tale? Agent Chen turned back to him, her expression serious. Because cautionary tales are forgotten. Real change comes from people who learn from their mistakes and help others avoid them. Besides, she added with a slight smile, you've already shown you're good at spotting federal agents. Might as well put that skill to better use. For the first time in days, Thompson felt a genuine laugh escape. It was small, but it broke something loose inside him. The weight of shame began to shift, transforming into something else, determination. When do we start? He asked, opening his notebook. Right now, she replied, pulling up a chair. First lesson. Let me show you what you actually interrupted that night. Understanding the bigger picture is step one. And Thompson. She paused, making sure she had his full attention. This is your chance to turn a career-ending mistake into a career-defining moment. Don't waste it. He nodded, pen ready. The empty pages before him weren't just for notes. 3 weeks into his suspension, Thompson's notebook was almost full. He sat in the FBI office's break room, sipping coffee that was much better than the precinct's, reviewing his notes from the morning briefing. His casual clothes didn't feel so out of place anymore. Ready for today's case study, Agent Chen appeared with her own coffee cup, carrying a thick file under her arm. Over the past weeks, she'd shifted from being his critic to his mentor, though she never let him forget the seriousness of their work. The Seattle incident, Thompson asked, recognizing the file. They'd been working through similar cases across the country, analyzing what went wrong and how it could have been prevented. Actually, we're going to review your incident today, she said, sitting down. Thompson felt his stomach tighten. It's time. You need to see it all. Every detail, every decision, every consequence. She opened the file and spread out surveillance photos from that night. The warehouse, the suspects, the victims. Everything he hadn't seen when he was focused on a simple traffic stop. Each photo told part of a story he'd interrupted. Look at this timestamp. She pointed to one photo. This was taken 2 minutes after you turned on your lights. See how they're already moving the victims. They had spotters watching for law enforcement. Your lights triggered their escape plan. Thompson leaned forward, studying the images. If I had known. That's exactly the point, she cut in. You couldn't have known. But you could have listened when I tried to tell you. That's what this program needs to address. Not just the procedures, but the mindset. She pulled out his original incident report, now covered in notes and comments. You wrote here that my suspicious behavior was actually perfect compliance with traffic laws. Let's talk about that. Why did following the law perfectly seem suspicious to you? Thompson sat back, thinking. The answer wasn't as simple as he'd once thought. I was looking for problems, he said slowly. When I couldn't find any, I invented them. I was frustrated with my own life, and I let that affect my judgment. Agent Chen nodded. Now apply that insight to bigger operations. When agencies don't communicate, when departments let pride or territory get in the way, what happens? People get hurt, Thompson replied, thinking of the faces in the surveillance photos. Cases fall apart. The real criminals get away. Exactly. She gathered the photos back into the file. Now, here's your assignment for the rest of the week. I want you to create a training scenario based on your experience. But here's the twist: write it from my perspective. Understand what it's like to be on the other side of that flashlight. Thompson opened his notebook to a fresh page. This wasn't just note-taking anymore. This was building something that could make a real difference. One more thing, Agent Chen added, standing up. The trafficking ring we were tracking that night. We got new intel this morning. They're rebuilding their operation in a different city. Another team is handling it. But I thought you should know, your mistake didn't stop us. It just made us adapt. She headed for the door, then paused. The next batch of field agents starts training next month. They're going to learn from what happened that night. Your story might save operations you'll never even know about. Remember that when you're writing that scenario. Left alone with his notebook, Thompson started writing. The words came easier now, filled with insights he'd gained over the past weeks. His mistake would always be part of his record, but maybe it could be more than just a black mark. Maybe it could be the beginning of something important. His phone buzzed. A text from his old partner, Rodriguez. "Captain's asking about you. When are you coming back?" Thompson looked at his notes, at the case files, at everything he. The police academy auditorium was packed. Thompson stood backstage, adjusting his tie for the 10th time. His uniform felt new again, though he'd only been away from it for a month. Through the curtain, he could hear the murmur of voices. Veteran officers, new recruits, and federal agents, all gathered for the pilot session of the new joint training program. Nervous? Agent Chen appeared beside him, reviewing her presentation notes. "Don't be. You've earned this moment." Thompson nodded, though his throat felt dry. In the audience were faces he knew: his captain, his partner Rodriguez, even Assistant Director Walsh. But there were also strangers, officers from other precincts, FBI agents, and most importantly, the next generation of law enforcement. Captain Rivera stepped up to the podium, and the room fell silent. "Today marks the beginning of something important," he began. "We're here to break down walls between agencies, to learn from our mistakes, and to become better at what we do. Our first speaker knows this subject from both sides." Thompson took a deep breath as the captain continued. "A month ago, his actions compromised a federal investigation. Today, he's here to make sure that never happens again. Officer Thompson, please come forward." The walk to the podium felt like miles. Some faces in the audience were skeptical, others curious. Rodriguez gave him a thumbs up from his seat. Thompson placed his notes on the podium, looked out at the crowd, and began to speak. "A month ago, I thought I knew everything about being a good police officer," he started. "I was wrong. Dead wrong. And that mistake could have cost lives." His voice grew stronger as he continued, sharing the story they'd all heard about but never from this perspective. He walked them through that night, not just what happened, but why. He talked about pride, about assumptions, about the dangerous gap between local and federal law enforcement. The room was silent, everyone leaning in to catch every word. "But this isn't just about my mistake," he continued, gesturing to the screen behind him where photos from similar incidents across the country appeared. "This is about all of us. Every day, we make split-second decisions. Those decisions ripple out in ways we might never see." Agent Chen joined him on stage, adding her perspective to the presentation. Together, they showed how simple miscommunications could derail months of work. They demonstrated new protocols, shared real examples, and most importantly, showed how cooperation could make everyone more effective. "The criminals we're fighting don't care about jurisdiction," Thompson explained. "They don't care which badge you wear or which department you represent. So why should we let those things divide us?" As they wrapped up the presentation, hands shot up across the audience. The questions weren't hostile as Thompson had feared. Instead, Officers shared similar experiences, asked about specific scenarios, and wanted to know more about the new protocols. Afterward, in the lobby, officers and agents mingled, exchanging cards and stories. Thompson watched as barriers began to break down, as conversations started that might save lives down the road. "Well done," Captain Rivera said, approaching with Assistant Director Walsh. "We've already had requests from 3 other academies to bring this program to their cadets. And 4 FBI field offices," Walsh added. "Your mistake might end up changing how we all work together. Not bad for a month's work." Thompson felt a weight lift from his shoulders, not completely gone, but lighter. His badge didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like a responsibility again, one he finally understood how to carry properly. As the crowd thinned out, Rodriguez caught up with him. "So, partner, ready to come back to the streets tomorrow?" Thompson looked around at the small groups still deep in discussion, at the bridges being built between agencies that had once viewed each other with suspicion. One year later, Thompson sat in his patrol car, watching the morning traffic flow past. His dashboard computer blinked with a new alert. A federal operation was active in his patrol area. A year ago, he wouldn't have had access to this information. Now, thanks to the new joint communication system his experience had helped create, local officers stayed informed about federal activities in their jurisdiction. His radio crackled. "All units, be advised. FBI operation in progress near 4th and Pine. Maintain normal patrol patterns, but stay clear of marked zones." Thompson checked his computer map, noting the highlighted areas to avoid. This was how it should work. Everyone knowing their role, working together instead of getting in each other's way. His phone buzzed with a text from Agent Chen. "Big briefing today. Your training program's going national. Want to help present." Before he could reply, a black SUV caught his attention. Like that night a year ago, something seemed off. But this time, Thompson knew what to look for. He ran the plates through the new integrated database, a feature added after his incident. The results popped up immediately. Vehicle registered to an ongoing DEA operation. He smiled, remembering how different things had been a year ago. That traffic stop could have ended his career. Instead, it had transformed not just him, but the entire system. The dispatch radio came alive again. "Attention all units. Multi-agency briefing at headquarters, 1400 hours. Mandatory attendance." Thompson headed to the station early, parking in his usual spot. The lot was fuller than normal, with vehicles from various agencies filling the spaces. Inside, the briefing room was packed. Local officers, FBI agents, DEA representatives, all gathered together. Assistant Director Walsh stood at the front, along with Captain Rivera and chiefs from other departments. Agent Chen spotted Thompson and waved him forward. "As most of you know, Walsh began, a year ago, a routine traffic stop exposed serious flaws in how our agencies communicate. Today, we're here to announce that the program born from that incident is being adopted nationwide." Thompson watched as they displayed the statistics. Successful joint operations up by 60%. Interagency incidents down by 75%. Conviction rates improved across the board. His mistake had sparked a revolution in law enforcement cooperation. After the briefing, Agent Chen caught up with him in the hallway. "Remember when you thought your career was over?" she asked with a knowing smile. "Every day," Thompson replied. "Keeps me humble." "Well, get ready to be a little less humble. Washington wants you to help roll this out nationally. Training sessions, consulting work, the whole package. Interested?" Before Thompson could answer, his radio chirped. A possible robbery in progress, just a few blocks away. "Go," Agent Chen said, understanding in her eyes. "Real police work comes first. We'll talk details later." As Thompson headed for his car, He passed the spot where he'd first confronted Agent Chen at fateful night. The memory no longer stung like it used to. Instead, it reminded him how far he'd come, how much had changed. His radio updated him on the robbery situation as he pulled out of the parking lot. This time, he knew exactly who he was, what his role was, and how to work with others. His badge felt right again, carrying the weight not just of authority, but of responsibility and understanding. Sometimes, he realized, the biggest mistakes led to the most important changes. His story would be told in police academies and FBI training sessions for years to come, not as a cautionary tale,